Hello, welcome. My name is April Shepard, and welcome to Lily's Show and Tell series. Lily stands for Lifelong Information Literacy, and we are a group of librarians and information professionals who work to promote lifelong information literacy. If you want to know more about Lily, I'm going to put my email and my Zoom handle so you can email me. Or if you just have questions about the series or anything else with Lily, just shoot me an email. Before we begin with Taylor, I'm sorry, did someone say something? Before we begin with Taylor, I just have a couple of quick housekeeping things. One, please make sure your mic is on mute unless you are speaking. Let's just make sure we're being respectful of each other. Don't foresee any problems there. And then lastly, feel free to put your questions in chat. I'll keep a track of them and we'll try and make sure we get to every question. And we've done pretty good so far with all of our previous sessions. So I think we will. So put your questions, I'm writing down, make sure Taylor gets them. I also want to thank the Lily Web Committee for putting this series together. I think they do a really great job. And now to our speaker. So Taylor Worsham is the Marketing and Adult Programming Coordinator for the Gunnison County Libraries in Gunnison and Crested Butte, Colorado. These public libraries serve close to 15,000 residents and visitors in the small mountain valley. In her daily life, Taylor manages a range of projects, programs, and services, including the focus of today's presentation, hosting tech classes for local seniors. In addition, Taylor is also a second semester MLS student at Emporia State University's distance program, and she inspires to apply her studies to better serve her community in terms of outreach, information access, and literacy, and meeting the challenges of an ever-growing technological landscape. In both realms, Taylor appreciates the learning and connections, building opportunities she has experienced as an early career professional, and hopes to continue the conversation about advancing digital equity here today. So Taylor, it's all on you.
All righty, thanks for that intro. And I'm just gonna see if I can figure out how to share my screen really quick. All right, here we go. So again, thank you for being here today. I was pretty excited when I found this opportunity to present through April's call out on the ALA listserv. And as she mentioned in my introduction, I'm going to present about my work hosting technology classes at our local senior center here in Gunnison County. And then I'll speak also about working one-on-one with seniors in the library itself, because a lot of those same things apply. And next slide. So I'll just describe these images here first and give you a little bit more about me. To the top left, that is a rendering of our new flagship public library that's going to be built and finished in October here, excuse me, in Gunnison. And then to the bottom left is our Crested Butte branch, which is about 30 miles up valley from Gunnison. It's in an 1880s schoolhouse. It's pretty cute there. And then the current Gunnison Library. And then to the right is an aerial photograph of Gunnison, really featuring the campus of Western Colorado University. And I bring that up because before I started working in the libraries here in 2019, I was a social and digital media coordinator for the marketing communication department there. And that's also where I went to school. So I definitely am pretty new to the field, but since we're in such a small library setting, I wear a lot of different hats and get to participate in many different endeavors. So right now, I would say I spend about 60% of my time interacting directly with the public on the circulation desk or hosting events in both branches. And then the remainder of my time, I'm supporting our operations through collection development and marketing functions. And as many of you, many librarians would echo, technology is a huge part of my daily life. I'm also a millennial, or as I've sometimes heard it referred to as digital native. I do think this term is apt because it's hard for me to remember a time where computers or the internet wasn't a part of my life. And I have memories growing up where I'm instant messaging with my friends or filming silly videos on webcams or digital cameras. And I bring this up because of my personal familiarity. My comfort level in approaching this subject is probably higher. I just have an ability to quickly type something in or be able to troubleshoot something pretty easily.
I bet me.
This fluency is helpful, but it can also make things challenging, especially with this audience group, and I'll speak to that more later on. And I'll give a disclaimer now that I usually start my presentations with. I am by no means an expert on these topics today. They're based off of my personal experiences. So I do try to use reliable sources to back up my knowledge base, like the software or the company itself, for answers to some of these troubleshooting issues. But trial and error is often the best way to learn. And I probably will end up saying we throughout the presentation, but that's more of a general reference to us as the libraries here. And like any library, it's really collaborative work. So I've worked with colleagues throughout the course of the project. So yeah, I will say we. And then if I'm going too fast or if you need to interrupt me, please do so. I always try to say that during my presentations because sometimes I do have a tendency to speak quickly when I get excited. So that's that little brief overview there. And yeah, I already talked about my library life, but today I'd like to cover some background of the project and then all the phases that it takes to go through actually giving these presentations, some major takeaways about working with this audience in general, and then an opportunity for you to share some thoughts and your experience as well, because I'd love to hear that. So, okay, so how did this project start? I'd like to begin with the why. Why try to advance digital literacy skills in senior populations through specific group classes? So of course, there was a personal motivation that went into it. When I was first looking into library science and applying to graduate school, I kept trying to write my personal statement, and I was reading about the digital divide. It's this concept, it's a buzzword that we're always throwing around, but how the heck could I actually work on this issue? I understood it to be an inequity between some segments of the population, whether due to age, geographic location, education, or any other number of other factors that restricts their technological access and know-how, and that it's incredibly harmful. And I'll show this quote that really stood out to me. I read this last semester, but it says, information professionals observe that library users are often 5 to 10 years behind in developing the skills they need to effectively use all the tools now available to them. So when I was reading things like this, I also observed that it was a phenomenon that was more concentrated in rural environments. And I'm making a bit of a generalization about my community here, but I did see a lack of experience and education around tech, especially in those who are at retirement age or older. This wasn't so apparent to me back when I was working at the university, even though it's the same town. But as soon as I started interacting with the public more, I noticed it right away. And I saw that what I've been reading about the digital divide was true for my community. There were some access issues here in terms of infrastructure. This is anecdotal, but there have been instances, whole days actually where we have been cut off from the world. There's no internet, there's no phone. It was eerie. It was like the Twilight Zone, but there was a fiber optic cable that was severed between us and Denver, and there was no way for us to connect with the outside world. And then I couldn't, in preparing this presentation, I couldn't find exact statistics about the home internet connectivity, but again, anecdotally, it's not an overwhelming majority. So there's not really that stable connection here. And then there's access in terms of devices. And with that, there's a range of how and to what level people have the ability to navigate systems on these devices, whether that's in the library or at home. And I'm sure everyone here experiences times in the library where people require assistance on these devices and they need help figuring out things that may be basic or elementary, but they're not. So I used these observations and challenges that I observed, that I found in my community, and I thought about them in the library field in general when I heard, again, reading last semester in grad school, that there's this assumption in society that everyone knows how to use tech. And that's pretty broad, but in this context, I mean, using tech in a way where you have an email address and you know how to use it to send and receive messages, know how to get to and search through a website to find out about things like when a business is open, or how to get photos off your phone to properly store them. And so I haven't seen this fluency and this assumption that we all have that everyone knows how to use tech to be true. And this is where we as librarians come in and can step in to offer help at their time of need. So if they're in the library, but then this project was seeking to move beyond that. And it was a motivating factor for me to try to help on a micro and a macro level. So in getting started, my director likes to say that everyone on our team has their own passions and skills and expertise that they bring to the table. And so I knew this was something I wanted to work on. My technical services colleague here was the only other person in the library that was doing this on an intentional basis, offering those one-on-one tech appointments that people could come in and ask for help and sit down with someone at their time of need. But that was not really her thing. I said she kind of begrudgingly offered those. But whenever I expressed interest and I had a little bit of an aptitude for it, I decided to go for it. So really in this situation, I'm pretty new to the libraries, but I'm eager to help. I have some basic skills, a little bit of instruction experience from my undergrad days as a teaching assistant. So, we were going for it, but I was also trying to be a little intentional about it. So I started looking for guidance from other librarians, especially those on the western slope of Colorado. And I attended an impactful lightning talk at a regional conference where a program assistant from the Telluride Public Library piloted these tech classes programs, so emphasis on the class part. And I'll show the topics that she went for, and I wouldn't say I borrowed from that, but I was inspired by her offerings. And she said in her program that she actually got folks of all ages, and she was able to witness the magic of a younger generation, the teens who would come help an older generation. So in this context, and we're brainstorming ways of how to elevate our tech instruction services, we were fortunate to be approached by the local senior center coordinator to start up on these tech classes. So I'm spending a little bit of time here with the background and getting started and the philosophy and the origins of the project, but bearing in mind why you're doing something and who you intend to do it for is incredibly important. In this case, we were dedicating our time to local seniors outside of the walls of the library to instruct a larger class, so more than one-on-one, on topics of their choice. So right here on the right, the City of Gunnison Senior Center is pictured, and it's attached to the Community Recreation Center, and they have their own space there behind the red walls, and it's got tables and chairs and couches, a kitchenette, a projector. They're really set up for these presentations. And so we started offering these quarterly sessions. We agreed to work with them. And I'll mention here, we're not a library that's really set up to do a lot of these presentations during open hours at the library. We don't have a dedicated programming space. And then we also don't have a formal outreach team. So why did we decide to go outside of the library and try to offer these never been done before classes? Some of our underlying motivations, or maybe as my director would say, justifications of why we were going to be doing this, is that we wanted to make the library visible outside of our walls and make ourselves appear to be an approachable presence in the community. And when we're offering these sessions, we can also let them know about our regular tech time appointments that you can set up and form a connection with them. And hopefully they'll say, hey, I saw you at the senior center teaching this class. Can you help me with this other thing? And we'll say, sure, come on down to the library. And then our goal was to reach this demographic in their space, in somewhere they're comfortable. And I don't think seniors here are an underserved population by our library by any means. They're huge users of our services in terms of checking out physical materials and attending events. But I wouldn't say they are our immediate digital cohort and are tapping into some of the online offerings that we provide. And so it's an opportunity for us to plug those. And then just professional development, practice teaching and communication skills to help us with our other jobs like programming or marketing. So we're doing it. We have our motivations, we have some philosophy that's guiding us. And I'll say here that this project has encompassed a time span between about summer 2019-ish through present day, of course, through the ups and downs of the pandemic, but I'll speak to that briefly. And then depending on what sort of topic we were offering, the planning process looked a bit different, but I'll try my best to go through those now. Collaboration. I put this slide here first because without a partnership with the senior center, this program wouldn't have gotten off the ground. So we were fortunate to be approached by them and to actually go for this idea and something that we wanted to do. And this group meets fairly regularly. They have a good space, and there was an established program of rotating speakers where they would have lunch together once a month, and then, like it's pictured here, someone from the community, like a police officer talking about how to avoid scams, or a financial advisor, someone like that would come and speak. And then this is the first time that the library was on the docket. So I mentioned collaboration here because I'd say finding a partner, even if it isn't directly like this, where it's an outreach situation where you're going to them. But if you're trying to do something for a specific audience and you want them to come to you, reaching out to that coordinator and someone who has contact with, let's say, the seniors, and sharing those opportunities with them, it's going to be way easier to try to promote your program and for it to be a trusted resource and it's legit and it's worth their time coming out. And I'm sure, as you guys know, there are so many reasons why a program can fail, even if it's got the best planning in the world. You know, it could be the wrong topic or the wrong time, or it wasn't marketed well enough. So having a partner really helps you get over a lot of these challenges. Next, how do we decide what we're going to teach? And I'll say, when it was confirmed that we were going to offer these, I was super excited. I just immediately started jotting down topics that we could cover. And I still have a document in my files that's titled Tech Class Ideas. And I glance at it from time to time. But what we actually did was solicit direct user feedback. So Elizabeth, the program coordinator from the Senior Center, invited us to have a presence at one of those lunches that I mentioned. And we got to sit down with folks and ask them, what do you need help with? What can we try to help you with? And I will say, it was very interesting. Of course, it was different than my list. And some of them even seemed pretty far-fetched and not something that I could be able to teach them, like how I could find a legit online job where I could earn a living. And I didn't know how many other people would want to know that and how we could actually provide something in that area. But overall, I did notice there were some patterns, but most of them were very specific asks, like, how do I email this photo to my daughter? How do I craft an email or forward one I've already received? How do I use Google Docs, things like that. And so that was a lesson for us when we were thinking about what we are going to present and teach on. It's that people have very specific things they want to learn with tech. So starting small here. When I was in 6th grade, I had to take a business computer information systems class. And so I've got this tech education in the back of my mind. I had a lot of great skills that we covered in that course: typing, Word, Excel. We even had to code our own website. But these senior center classes were not that. It's not a whole semester. It's just 1 to 2 hours. And I don't think I've even covered all of Word, much less the Microsoft Office suite or the Google suite. So these classes, it's more like how you get into the service, what the menu looks like, how to play around in the document, and then let me know what questions I can answer for your specific things you want to learn. And then I'll say this here too, it's important to note that we're not just teaching things that the library offers, our e-resources, for instance. We do want people to know about those, and we want them to tap into that, but it's about building up basic literacy and familiarity with digital systems. That was our goal here. So narrowing it down. And I'll speak to this more on the next slide, but we're kind of teaching off what we already know or what we can gain a competency in pretty easily. And we have to be able to answer questions that you don't necessarily prepare for, you can't foresee, but again, it's about the basics. So do you know the topic, or can you get to know it pretty easily? Do you have enough time in these 1 to 2 hours to be able to cover enough where people gain an understanding? Are people's attention spans going to hold, or is it just way too complex for them? Are they going to get bored and give up? Is it an interesting topic and widely applicable, or is it pretty niche? So will it only appeal to a couple of people? So like I mentioned, the technology classes, this was the graphic from the conference that I went to, and this was a good jumping off point for me to think about what sort of things we could offer. But in this context, we always framed our preparations with what is the number one skill or lesson you hope they walk away with. As I've mentioned, these lessons are based off our own experiences. For example, if we're talking to them about the Google Suite, that's a pretty easy thing to get into because we use it every day. If we're getting into something like the ins and outs, the privacy and sharing settings on Facebook, that could take a little more brushing up on and research. So in our research, we're seeking out additional help from the companies, or we're looking for tutorials that have already been made, or browsing through help forums. It's especially helpful if you find a library that's already doing these sorts of tutorials, or if they have web instructions or videos, then you can modify that to fit your audience. And of course, it's even more helpful when the software company offers a pre-made presentation or a PowerPoint that can be adaptable. And I found this with Libby specifically. They offered a webinar about teaching, sharing Libby with patrons. And so it was helpful not only for the content, but then they also talked about some pedagogy. And that's where it was really hammered into my head that this is very broad, don't get too specific. And yeah, so with that being broad, I would say once you're actually presenting, you can always ask them to come see you if they need a more in-depth explanation, or if they would like to spend more time, maybe they're just not getting it. And I'll speak about it in the presentation itself, but just knowing that you don't have to get it down all today. These things take time and they take practice. So the setting, I bring this up in the context of virtual or in person, because we're living in pandemic times. And we did do both. Obviously, one worked way better than the other one, and I'm sure that probably doesn't come as a surprise, but I'll just share. In fall 2020, we applied for and received an ALA Virtual Learning and Enhancement mini grant to just keep supporting this program. But this grant specifically focused on digital learning and using the Google platform Applied Digital Skills to facilitate lessons. They had guided plans and step-by-step videos for presenting the information. So it really helps you a lot prepare what you're going to teach. And so we're like, great, let's get together and offer this virtually, and we can watch these videos together. And there's all these great materials and people can do it step by step as we're going along in the virtual meeting. But the feedback that we heard was that people didn't know how to split their screens into multiple windows, and we didn't cover that thoroughly enough for them to actually be able to follow along with the meeting, which is where we were sharing our screens and playing the videos, and then having another window open to actually practice what was going on. So from that and just other feedback, mainly from Elizabeth, saying our seniors are not quite comfortable enough with virtual meetings, we have decided that synchronous tech classes are not great for our audience here. And as a solution to that, we are going to pursue asynchronous tutorials. And I think that would be more effective so they can watch it on their own time and, pause it if they need to or come back to it. And then we could do a synchronous session where we meet up after they've viewed the video and troubleshoot things at that point. And then I've already kind of spoken to this, but considering which is the best fit as far as library versus outreach, I think depends on your space and if there's enough room for people to spread out and feel comfortable and having somewhere to plug in their device, or if you're providing devices for them, etc. So I think that is really dependent on your particular community. So once we're ready to put our presentation all together, I've always, kind of like how I'm doing with this presentation here, I just make a pretty basic slideshow and I have some brief talking points, but I definitely have not prepared a full script because it's very easy to get derailed in these situations. So being really flexible here and building in time for hands-on learning is absolutely crucial. And then with the talking points, unlike this presentation here, I wouldn't actually even put a bulleted list of what I'm trying to cover, because I've found that if you're putting terms up there on the slide and maybe they don't know what the word means or something they're not familiar with, they're going to be spending that time where you're speaking and you're presenting, looking at the slide and trying to figure out what that word means and not necessarily following along with the presentation. So with that, I'm usually very visual heavy, and I think that screenshotting things in your window or on your phone and putting really big arrows and even letting them come up and try to see it up close, the screenshots on the slide, is really helpful. And with videos, I put this on here, but it's tricky with these. Like I used this with the mobile photography one so they could see, step by step as we're going through the camera app. That is awesome. And I want to do more of that, but figuring out the timing in between the steps of what you're showing and giving enough time to be able to explain and give people time to look at where you're trying to get them to look, that's tricky. So it's good, but it's hard. And then I put this on here to handouts as you're making your slides and your talking points. It would be really good to have a physical piece of paper that you give them that have your main points. And I tried, I was like, oh, this would be great to print out my PowerPoint and give that to them so they can take notes. But I didn't have any words on the PowerPoints, so it wasn't very helpful. So instead of that, just making a quick one sheet handout that they can get the gist of the presentation with, and they all make their own notes anyway, but just putting your info out there for them. So at this stage, we've gone through the necessary preparations. And for me, it's time to put on my best chipper librarian persona and roll over to the senior center. I'm always brushing up on my public speaking skills, but these next couple of slides are some things that I've found to be helpful. So in this audience specifically, this is a screenshot of me in action with folks set up at the table, going through something there on the projector. So like I mentioned in the beginning, giving disclaimer, and this one is just trying to make them feel good and say, there's no silly questions here. We're all learning. This is what you're here for. And please, again, slow me down, ask me to speak up if I need to. And here's my contact information so that if you don't get something, you can always ask me later or come in. And so just trying to remind myself to speak slow and at a good volume. And then I do repeat myself and circle back to my main points. And I try not to get too lost in the weeds or like say, oh, this relates to this, so let's do this and this and this. So trying not to derail myself, and giving those frequent breaks and being able to stop where you're doing the presentation and go over and get on their level and help them walk through things. With that, I'll say it's really important in these classes or in tech in general, to empower them and to give them the directions for them to be able to do something themselves. It's tough because you could just be like, oh, I can just do it in like 3 clicks, but to actually be patient and walk them through and say, okay, you see that button in the top right corner. And I never drive. I never take the device out of their hand and do it for them, because then how do they learn? And so along with that is being a cheerleader and trying to empower them and making them feel like we're on a journey together. And I hear a lot of people say, well, I need help. I'm really technologically challenged. And it's self-deprecating. And I know they're just a little self-conscious about their abilities, but just trying to make them feel good and say, well, let's take a look, or let's figure this out together. And, making a little joke that you don't always know the answers either. And so you're probably wondering what the other photograph is. That is my kitty. And in this presentation, in the presentations that I do, I try to do silly little things like that as well to show that this can be fun. And, I'm approachable. Let me help you and let's be silly and laugh at my cat together. I don't know. So giving a disclaimer, going really slow, trying to be approachable and being positive and not being afraid to step in and give them directions and run through things and being patient. Sometimes it takes multiple times for them to get it down, and that's okay. So I included this here because after a session, or even as I was building this presentation, I was like, oh, well, I should do this and I should do this, and let's make these sessions even better. And I'll say I keep a work journal, and I have since I got my first job, and that's a really great practice for me to be able to sit down and reflect on how these presentations went and what I'd like to work on for next time. And so I revisited that to be able to share some of these things here. So learning, and I'm working on slowing down, of course, because there is so much to try to fit in to a presentation, and it's really hard to distill it down to the basics. And there have been times where I've been in a class and it's such a cool, fun topic. I think it was the mobile photography class that I did, and our time was up and I still had like 10 slides left. So, working on editing myself And I think I scrolled through at that point, and some people were like trying to get the last little bit, but then other people are already overwhelmed by the end. And so if you show that you still have a lot more about this topic, then you can really undermine their confidence in what they've just spent the last 2 hours learning. So definitely trying not to cover too much and not rushing to fit it all in. And then with this, yeah, it's kind of what I was talking about with the handouts and the tutorials. So doing more of the videos and the handouts that they can revisit at home, or making them available. This is our YouTube. These are just library resources, but providing some of those non-library software and skills as well. And then because we're librarians, it's always important to think about evaluation and assessment, and how are these sessions actually working out. And I'll admit, we're not super big on that here at our libraries with programs, just because we, let's say we put out a survey while we're there, or even after the fact. We don't want people to feel like they have to walk away with something, or have to have learned something. Sometimes there's intrinsic value in coming and being around people, or just being out of your house. So with that, that's kind of the background of why I haven't pursued this to this point, but I would really like to know how I can gather more feedback on what they're learning and how we can improve our teaching. Ooh. Major takeaways. I think I talked about the timing quite a bit, slowing down and being patient. And it's just good for me to remember as I'm going through this. Working with this audience with seniors and providing tech instruction in general is not going to go away. It's new for us here in the library and in the community, but I hope that we can continue to expand our program. And then with that, I do think that it's worth it. If you can be patient and humble yourself, you can remember that, this might be something that I'm good at, but they're not good at, but they're good at other things, and they can school me in a lot of other things. You can have a good attitude and know that you can really help someone. And when you're helping them, if you have targeted goals and lessons, they can walk away with knowing something specific, like, oh, today we're going to learn how to print out an email, for instance. It may seem like, oh, we can cover that in 5 minutes, but you'd be surprised at the amount of time it takes. And just having that in the back of your mind, that at the end of the day, you really just want them to know this one thing. So also asking them what they'd like to know to tailor their content, and having their input drive your lessons. And of course, have fun with it. So this is my contact information here, my email. I'd love to chat with you more about it. And then if you'd like to see my PowerPoints and kind of how I laid out some of the things that I talked about, not all of our files are in there, but there is a link to where you can get to our drive. Cheers. Thank you, guys.
All right. Will you be okay if we send that link too? And when we get the recording and everything? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Are you ready for some questions?
Yeah. Should I stop sharing my screen?
It's up to you.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that so I can see folks.
All right. The first one, I just thought it isn't a question, it's just a comment, but I thought it was relevant and interesting enough to go ahead and say it. This is Mason. He says he's not sure if anyone is aware, but there's a great device for homebound patrons called Granddad. It's kind of like an iPad, but made for older adults. So there was a little discussion going on about Granddad, which I've never heard of.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Somewhere earlier you mentioned a conference. Do you remember the name of the conference? Is that something? Is it something you would recommend attending?
Yeah, so this conference was in October 2019, but it's for the Marmot User Group, which is a consortium of Colorado libraries. So I don't know actually if you could go to it if your library wasn't in Mug.
Yeah, I know that some of the Colorado stuff's open because I've attended some, but I don't know about their conference. So probably not. I don't know. But Colorado has great webinars.
Yeah.
What's the difference between floating screens and a split screen?
Sorry, one more time.
You were talking about teaching them how to do split screen. So what would be the difference between having two floating screens, and then having an actual split screen?
Well, I don't know that term specifically, but when I was trying to tell them how to split their screens, I was having them, and this is on Windows, but actually drag the window to the corner of the screen to where it accepts it and it locks it in that position, and then dragging the other window to the other corner so that it's usually split right down the middle. And then, they could have used floating windows as well, but I don't even know if they could, figure out how to do those too.
Well, that would have been my answer too. I like the split screens because it does lock it in place and you don't have to worry about things sliding and, you accidentally click on one and it does something crazy. How do you deal with the variety of hardware they're using during each session?
That is a really good question and something that we ran into because, we usually prepare the two major operating systems like Android or Apple or Windows and Mac, but and I should have probably put this in the presentation, but having a colleague there, I usually rely on Elizabeth, the senior center coordinator, to step in and help if, let's say, what we put in the presentation for those two isn't necessarily working out for their device.
What are the best practices you have found for marketing the asynchronous video resources?
Marketing the what?
Your asynchronous videos.
Well, we're not super advanced with our videos here, but we mainly use YouTube, and then we're sharing it across on our website and then on social media, and we send a email newsletter so that they're kind of housed there on YouTube.
Okay. So are they searchable by Google? A little off topic, but you mentioned work journals and you got lots of people excited. So what do you record in a work journal?
Well,
So
I write, not really in a strategic way. Like I do reflections for the week or the month, or I really like to share little victories, like if something worked out, and sometimes frustrations of your coworkers. And of course, this is on a non-work device, but yeah, I shouldn't I learned about it a long time ago as a way to get everything out of your head, and they recommended to daily practice actually. So what went well for you today? What didn't go so well for you today? What is the number one thing that you accomplished, and what's the number one thing you want to work on tomorrow? So just getting your thoughts out a little bit more.
Okay. This is my question. I'm in Northeast Arkansas, and so we have pockets in Arkansas, Boot Hill, Missouri, where we have very poor internet, including areas where there's no cell access. So you're really limited. And some of our communities are very tiny. So they don't have senior citizens. So how do you reach out to what I would call like the solo seniors?
That is a really good question. And in this presentation, it was more about like reaching an established group, but in those communities, are there established libraries? Like, is there a point of contact with that audience in that way?
It depends. We may have like a county library, but it'll be like in the bigger of the cities in the county, or maybe the bigger two. And then we'll have, like I know my stepfather, he lives in a little town that doesn't have a library. He doesn't have, he has a phone, he can barely text. He doesn't have data, he doesn't have internet. He doesn't think he needs it. So there's that issue too. He's done so well without it, he doesn't need it. So I don't need to teach him.
That's really tough. I mean, we do have non-digital marketing where we're trying to get people that aren't necessarily finding us on the web through flyers and brochures. So maybe trying to go that route. I'm gonna have to think about that. That was a really good question.
All right. And it may be you don't have so many of those little towns in the community, in your area. All right. I got two more. So if you guys have any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Does being in the senior citizen, do you think that makes them feel more comfortable asking questions?
In the center itself?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, because it's just them there. I'm not saying it's a private room, but it's a pretty separate space, and they already spend a lot of time there with other things. They're comfortable. And then in a library, there could be other age ranges, which I spoke about in Telluride. That was like pretty magical to have the intergenerational aspect, but I think that could be a deterrent if someone feels like they have a really long way to go. They don't want to be holding up the group with what they're learning. So if it's at the senior center, they know it's going to be their peers.
And there was discussion in the chat about, sometimes patrons, they don't want to come across as stupid or dumb, so.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really challenging to their confidence to feel like they're so behind in this and they don't even know where to start.
And the other thing I find is I don't want to bother you. Like, I'm so behind. I take so much time. I don't want to bother you by having you do this. Do you run into that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, or people will just be like, wow, like you're a wizard. And it's like, no, like by saying that, you're kind of putting yourself down in a way.
Yeah, and they go, and you're like, no, don't put that on me because I don't know everything.
Also, no.
Yeah. So last question. So please put them in your chat. So I know this is a big problem. Do you have any classes on like misinformation for that's aimed at seniors?
Yeah, so that's not something that we have been asked to teach on, though I am really interested in that. I know our college here, their library is pretty big on information literacy. And so I think that's definitely going to be a need in the future, but we have not done that in the past.
Okay. You got to start at the ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, so that's our last question. There's a lot going on in chat with sharing different resources, sharing different devices aimed at seniors. So when we send out the recording and the slides, we're going to make sure to send out those resources too. That way everyone, including you, Taylor, will have access to some of this cool stuff that's being mentioned in the chat.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you.
Oh, last question. Thank you, Esther. We're almost done. Maybe collaborate with your local college and university library to do some misinformation sessions.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Taylor. I really appreciate it. This is great because I don't work with a lot of seniors, so it's nice to see the flip side because I'm working with supposedly the digital Swabi students. So this was really good. Thank you. I will send out the recording no later than Friday and have everything to everyone. So thank you. Great job.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.